So I designed my first live retreat, Audacious Embodiment, as a feminine reclamation boot camp and the ultimate pattern disrupt of all of the ways we close down, shut off, and choose survival unto death instead of vitality in our lives as women. So I called in an all-star cast to take the stage and expand the permission field of what we get to be as women, who we are allowed to be, and to guide you through shadow work with yours truly, Osho dynamic meditation, family constellation, ancestral song, hair whips and sensual hip grinding routines, creating art out of your longing, twerk, and perhaps the climax, pun intended, of the event, where in the able hands of a dominatrix, I gave a surprise to me demo on how spanking can be used to alchemize your inner tyrant's voice into love, celebration, and acceptance. It was game changing, not only for me, but for everyone who was able to witness this. And it is now recorded and available for you to partake in. So one of the attendees said, I left feeling so much more attuned and open to my emotions. And I feel this connection to my intuition and my body's sensations that I didn't even realize was there. And another said, this past weekend, she opened the door, invited me in, and gave me permission to open my heart, move my body and dance, heal my mother wound, say no, say yes, use my voice, honor, respect, and admire men, honor my own courage, meet my dominance and submission, meet my edge, and go past it. I know that these recordings will translate what occurred that weekend, and I cannot wait to hear what gets audaciously ignited within you. So check them out. They're available on my shop page and at the link in show notes. I'm Dr. Kelly Brogan. You may know me as a New York Times bestselling author of a book with an exploding pill on the cover, renegade psychiatrist, pole dancer, or honorary member of the Disinformation Dozen. What can I say? I'm a born provocateur. I've spent most of my recent life exposing deceptions, connecting dots, and discovering the secret places my inner victim is still waiting to be liberated. And now I feel called to help you reclaim all of your parts, your health, your sexuality, your power, and your expression, so that you can finally truly own yourself. I want to ignite in you that inner knowing and the pulsing vitality that lives beneath your disempowerment, disconnection, and resentment, so that you can audaciously, courageously, and playfully alchemize your struggle into the specific pleasure of who you are. This is Reclamation Radio, a Soulfire production. Hi, and welcome back to Reclamation Radio. I'm Dr. Kelly Brogan, and I am here with Kimi Inch. The last time, and you can listen to our last conversation, it seems like 5 lifetimes ago. The last time we had a conversation, I was most interested in learning about Kimi's perspective as a leader, she would call it, and we'll get into that again, just a refresh, what many would know as a dominatrix, and the winding path that she has walked over her lifetime and career in service to helping people come into pleasure, embodiment, and personal power. And we hadn't ever met, and I hadn't ever had a personal experience with her. And since that time, I have had one of the more influential experiences probably of my life with this woman on my own stage. And I've also been in her extraordinary container called Something More, which is a retreat that I went to with a girlfriend of mine. And I would love to share some of the highlights, and also to bring some of these. I made like all of these mental notes during the retreat of the things that you say that I just don't hear others saying, that are such extraordinary gems. And I really want to put them in a little glass case and make sure that we gift them to everybody listening. So welcome, woman. I'm so happy to be in conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I love being here. I love your audiences. They're so amazing. And I want to remind you, we're actually spanking sisters.
Yes. Oh, I'm about to get into that.
But we will definitely get into that. But yeah, I would love to introduce myself. My name is Kimi Inch. I'm a professional dominatrix. I'm a sex positive edutainer. I'm a trauma informed somatic therapist, and I'm a motivational spanker. And I get off on introducing people into learning what's possible in their erotic lives.
Yes, you do. I told her, I was like, you are introducing yourself because
Yes.
no one can do it better. You are just the best. And that's what's so extraordinary about you is you are literally what you just described. I mean, your capacity to hold space as a literal entertainer, like hilarious and, extraordinary storyteller. And the way that you can captivate an audience is something I want to depict. There's also replays available, PS, if you want to indulge
It's so
in
good.
the experience yourself. But then you also have such a heart-centered mission in the taboo world of conscious kink. So I want to unpack that a little bit. I know that your story could be, I was actually just thinking this before we started recording. I was like, I wonder if you'll ever write a book about like an autobiography, but I'd love to just give a glimpse into how it is that you found yourself in the unusual role that you occupy as somebody who is both somatically informed and sexuality focused. That combination, you'd think it'd be more common, but in my experience, it's vanishingly rare. And that's a part of which I also want to unpack for everybody, like what I mean by this, but that's part of the safety that you confer to these explorations that is not always available, and that's part of why BDSM and kink can earn, perhaps, validly, a bad rap, is because, the container is not well set. So how did you find yours? You've been doing this for a minute. So how did you find yourself in this position? No pun intended, Kimmy.
Yes, well, it's interesting because my first brush up with kink was as a child growing up, and that's really what is the link between our desires and our fantasies are the impressions that were made upon us as we were growing up. And some people like to say that our fantasies are linked to our traumas, and I haven't heard any scientific research to back that up, but I do believe after working with thousands of clients and my own personal experience that there has been impressions around intimacy, sex, love, relationships that could influence what we desire and our path in the erotic world. So I remember watching an R-rated movie called Basic Instinct with my mother, already awkward. And there's a scene in the movie where it gets really sexually violent and they're scratching each other and biting each other and having sex and orgasming and getting really kinky and violent. And my mom turns to me in that moment and is like, you should not be watching this. And in that moment, it was a mix of arousal and turn on and embarrassment and shame and confusion and all of these things sort of mixing together within my body, and chemicals are releasing and heart's racing and genitals are tingling and just all the things. And I remember that being such a poignant moment because I had never felt such an intense sensation in my body before. And I remember in that moment being like, oh, it's so good doing things we shouldn't be doing. Like I felt so alive in that moment because of that naughty nature of it all created the thrill for me. And because of that impression, moving forward into my own sex life, when I started to have sex with the first boyfriend that I ever had, we were about 3 times in, and I was like, oh God, is this it? And it was the desire to like, how do I spice it up? Like, how do I bring that charge into this relationship? I just thought that's what it was supposed to be like. So I would suggest tying each other up and spanking each other and dressing up and pretending to be different people. And he was like, as accommodating as a 16-year-old boy could be. And he just didn't understand why I wanted to do all of this weird shit, as he said it. So flash forward, and I'm living in Japan as a DJ. And I was invited to start DJing at fetish parties. And before then, I had no idea like really what kink was or BDSM or fetish. I had seen Pulp Fiction, and there's that part where they say, bring out the gimp. And I was like, no, thank you. Like, I was like, oh, I don't know what that's about, but that's scary. But here I was DJing at this fetish party, and I look across the room, and people are in these like lavish outfits of latex and leather and lace and schoolgirl uniforms. And like, just like you name it, like everybody is dressed to the nines, and they're interacting in the ways that I saw Basic Instinct, in the sense that they're tying each other up, they're spanking each other, they're, biting each other, they're interacting in this like really intense way. And I was like, okay, all the dots are starting to connect. I guess I'm kinky. And I met women there who were professional dominatrixes, and they introduced me to that work. And originally I was like, oh, hell yeah, I'm going to be a queen. I'm the boss. I get to tell people what to do for money. I don't have to take off my clothes. I don't have to have sex with anyone. And my really limited perception of that world is what people see on movies and TV and the media. Like, I was a total fake dom when I started out, because I had no idea really what the heart and the soul of that world was about. And, I think about people who don't really know what they're doing in that world. And I think they're just embracing a stereotype that they see, in these movies and things that are sensationalized, that, it's abuse and it's violence and it's unhealthy, mentally unstable people engaging in these activities. So when I started doing deep inner work on myself, I realized like, wow, actually, this is a sacred space where people can really express themselves in the most vulnerable way a person can express themselves. And I was there to help guide, influence, and inspire their life force energy, and help them to feel seen and expressed and celebrated for who they were. And that in and of itself can be so healing, to just be like, tell me more. Tell me more about the secret desires you don't tell anybody else. Like, tell me more about that thing that you want to try, or the thing that you're so excited about. And it's such a beautiful experience to see people be expressed in their deepest desires. And I decided to go back to school to study somatic therapy. I've been training in Tantra for many, many years, and combining kink, Tantra, and somatic healing work all together. I created sort of this healing modality that I love to share with others, so people can get in touch with their erotic energy and feel that they have everything they need within themselves as well.
Amazing. I mean, we've come to really the same focal point through very disparate paths, you and I, which is the cultivation of aliveness, right? When I was in your container, you used that word a lot. You used the word eros, and this reclamation, right, of that vital force energy, and how you have experienced kink as being one of the foundational methodologies, even, right? So that it can be framed as a therapeutic modality for shame alchemy, and for the permission, I guess, to be conferred to what would otherwise be kept in a taboo vault of self-rejection. It's extraordinary. And I think when you don't have the framework that you bring around reading the body, right, and staying attuned not only to your body, but to the body of whomever it is that you're working with, and creating impeccable containers for that. Yeah, it can be a lot, a lot. It can mistranslate. It can, in many ways, probably end up perpetuating that which it intended to resolve. So, I'm the last person who's going to be like fear mongering about how you could mess yourself up with kink. However, I've just appreciated the consciousness that you've brought to it. And I also know that you don't necessarily think of this as a sexual practice. And when I was at your retreat at Something More, we shared one morning, and I shared, people were just vulnerably sharing, because you make it very easy, for people to do that. And so I shared this sort of, I don't know, I guess I was becoming self-conscious about this, because it's not my first BDSM retreat. And I shared, I wonder what it is about me that I continue to sign up for these experiences despite not being available for sexual contact and play. Like, why do I keep going to these retreats? Like, what is wrong with me? Do I think I'm like a fucking anthropologist or something? Like, what's the deal? And, I also didn't necessarily need to even say that, because you create such a huge permission field, and you make it so okay to engage these practices simply as embodiment and somatic practices, right? So I personally didn't have what would be described as like a sexual experience. And I came away having a lot of practice under my belt with a lot of, especially kink exploration. And we can talk a little bit about what the retreat consists of. But I think there's no better example. And I thought this right after it happened. I said to my team, there's no better example of the capacity for kink to alchemize, restrictions and contracted tight places in the body than what you demoed at my event. So I put on, for those of you who somehow haven't heard me yapping about this, I put on my first live event in November of last year. And I invited 11 women who have offered me permission to woman in ways that I formerly believed I was not allowed to woman. And Kimi was one of those. And when she took the stage, because I had only ever, been exposed to her online, I hadn't yet had the experience of being in a room with this woman. And when you took the stage, the command that you wield, I mean, it was felt, you could have heard like a pin drop, like a true mistress of ceremonies. The way that you hold space is, you're just larger than life. And that's probably why you have been successful in this arena that you've chosen as a leader and an artist, and the experience that you invited me. So you had asked me very innocently beforehand, you're like, will you be my, so there are 100 women in the room. You're like, will you be my spanking demo? So I had just happened to be wearing this like velvet getup that had like a detachable skirt, as you do. And so I thought, sure, I have a leotard on, like it's not a big deal. And, I've already like danced in a bikini on Instagram. So whatever. So I figured I was literally just going to like, lean over. I'm very comfortable. I would have been comfortable nude in front of these women. Like it was fine. Right. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And, at the risk of reducing something that really was ineffable to, this brief description, you demonstrated how one would use impact play, so-called impact play, and even punishment play in a non-sexual context. That's why you called us spanking sisters, in a non-sexual context for self-integration and expansion and self-development. And you just knew exactly what to say to me. And I'm going to invite you to share your perspective on the event in a second, but you knew exactly what to say to me to elicit one of my rather like universal, right? But one of my, points of struggle, which is the way in which I call it smalling myself, right? Or attenuating myself, or, sort of like just shrinking down a bit. So I'm more bite size and not, ironically, given the event that I put on, not always like walking audaciously, right? Rather sort of shrinking back, I guess. And who can't relate to that, right? I mean, that's why I put the event on to begin with, is to start to invite all of us as women to begin to lean into the discomfort of that, right? And so you knew exactly what to say to locate that. And you demoed the spanking on me as not as Kimi saying bad girl Kelly, right? But as my own higher self, so to speak, who was, playfully saying enough is enough. And you invited one of my best girlfriends, Sarah, up on stage with me to, again, anchor that safety for me and to open this heart channel, and then invited all of the rest of, oh my God, it makes me want to cry. All the rest of the women.
Swelling. Yeah, I can feel it.
It was so extraordinary. And like what we experienced collectively, it was alchemy. It was emotional alchemy, like for every single woman in the room. So it was fucking epic. And like so many women told me it was the highlight of the entire experience, which is saying something, because there were some boss babes on that stage. So thank you. I want to just formally thank you. And I would love for you to describe like what your intention was and how you like structure an experience like that for maximal impact. No pun intended, right? Because that's exactly, you knew what was, I know you knew what was going to happen and you delivered on that. And none of the rest of us, we were just brought on a beautiful ride. So I'd love to hear about like your obviously many years of experience creating these, dynamics for people to really work through. I mean, imagine how much therapy would have been required. Like I could have spent endless hours in therapy, never having an embodied experience. I also want you to speak to why the spanking, right? Like, why is that important? Having an embodied experience of transmuting something that is otherwise like weighing me down. So yeah, what was your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, like I'm fighting back tears just hearing all this feedback, and it's so beautiful because the honor of being able to speak to your audience around something that I'm so passionate about is such a great thing. And then the experience with you, it was interesting because it's important to me to demonstrate how we can dive deeper and go beyond what's on the surface, especially when it comes to kink and sexuality as a whole. And the idea of impact play, which means striking another person repeatedly for sexual gratification, most people think of this as two consenting adults using it as an erotic punishment of some kind. And that can be really fun. And if we were able to show how much deeper that can go, that is basically was the intention of like, let's go there. Like, let's go down the rabbit hole. And Kelly, I have to say, I, as a woman who's a leader in my spaces and seeing you as a leader as well, like, you're such a beautiful reflection for me and for all that you touch with your heart. And I remember having you in position and you look absolutely gorgeous and warming up the body, moving some energy, letting it flow. And I can feel the part that was like needing to really receive because you had just put so much energy and effort into creating this event that just everybody was benefiting from. And it was like, people were having these expansive, amazing moments. And it was truly my desire to give to you in that moment. And as I was demonstrating this idea of using spanking or impact play as moving energy through your body so the audience could see, like, it's not just like, who's your daddy? Like it's more, it could be more than that, and I'm doing percussion a little bit up and down your back. I'm doing it on your buttocks. I'm like rubbing it, your legs and your arms, like having it move throughout your whole body. And I wanted to show, like, if we're going to play with this idea of erotic punishment, how about instead we use it as a way of like, instead of saying you're a bad girl for not doing the dishes or you were late, like, why don't we talk about the ways you're standing and blocking your own happiness or your own pleasure? And let's start calling you forward. And as we were moving in that space together, you were so open and so willing to go there. But I also can just feel like something from the higher power just like leading me through this experience. And I remember after I did the spanking with you, there were several women that were like, that was really risky. Like that could have went totally sideways. And she could have been like, what the fuck? Like, and I was like, I know, isn't that thrilling? And they're like, what would you have done? And I'm like, I would have just demonstrated how to clean up a mess or how to, get back into right relationship after some misalignment or some misattunement. But there was such a deep attunement between the both of us, and feeling your body open and expand and receive gave me the green light to really know that this is something that we can bring even more into the forefront. So having all the women come forward, they were so excited to also participate and give to you as well, and to witness you and to pour into you these words of affirmation and what they see in you and their gratitude and their honor of you. It was like such an amazing experience to feel like everybody's heart exploding and to just hold space for you. And it just reminds me of like really what's possible when we're really, really willing to be in our hearts and really willing to open up to infinite possibility. Because you think about kink as a slap and a tickle and a little bit of a let's put on these, furry handcuffs. But ultimately people use kink because they want to feel something. and being able to open up and feel something and actually take a break from our identities and our roles in the world of like being the leader, the organizer, the boss babe, or whatever those things are, and have an ego death almost, where it's like none of that fucking matters anymore. Like what really matters is your beautiful spirit that everyone wants to celebrate and embrace, and to also include some intensity while you're receiving these words of affirmation. Your brain is thinking to itself like, this isn't normal. Like just like all ritual, your brain is paying attention, and your subconscious turns on and pays attention in moments that are very, very different than what normal day life looks like. So when you're using that as an opportunity to input new information, that is going to be such an experience for the brain, neurologically speaking, to rewire itself through that human contact and through the power of suggestion and through the power of the intensity of the sensation that you were feeling simultaneously. All of those are a recipe for you to have an altered state of consciousness, to shift your perception and to open you up to unconditional love, and hopefully even get you in touch with source as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what I experienced. It was a transcendent moment. And the ingredients that you just referenced are all a part of that specific alchemy, right? So I felt, I mean, I was on the beach with one of my friends the next day, and I literally had bruises on my ass. So like
Oh,
I felt intense sensation. Would I call it like pain? Probably not. But it was very intense sensation that drew my attention inward into my body. I mean, I was up on stage. I had every reason to be self-conscious, right? To be like floating. I often float outside, to be floating out of my body, watching, criticizing, judging, discerning, how I was being perceived. And instead, because of the impact, my focus was inside, and it's like the epic pattern disrupt. There wasn't the cognitive availability to like resist all of the language, like the spells that were being cast on me, these affirmations, right? And I'm not a big like affirmation girl, but in this context, it's such an incredible mixture of ingredients that allows for, exactly as you're describing, these like new like psychoneurologic tracks to be laid in fresh snow. And you would never imagine, that could be on the other side of something that seems like, why are these two adult women, doing this? And that's what I find so fascinating about, again, like your specific approach, and why you advocate. I mean, you talk about, right, that you have these girlfriends who are platonic friends, and that you help, right? That you call one of these girlfriends, like if you just need to experience movement, like through your vessel of a body, right? You might call somebody, you call them your spanking sisters, right?
Oh yeah, I love it. And it's fun to think about like what's going on in our lives where maybe we're feeling some dissatisfaction or feeling some disconnection, or maybe not so sure about, at the play party during my 4-day weekend that you were at, I remember sharing like after a breakup, feeling like my self-esteem was really shot, and there was this desire to just feel wanted and desired. So I actually asked for it, and I said like, hey, to the men in the room, I want to feel your desire and your want, and I want you to be inappropriate. Like, I'm tired of being the honored, respected teacher. Like, look at me like a piece of meat, and I could ask for that. I could ask to be objectified consciously and consensually, and have an experience of like, well, if you're really desiring to be wanted, like, let's turn that up, like as high as it can go, and see what happens in your body when you receive what you desire and what you want. And that could have looked at many different ways. I could have asked to instead objectify others, and I could have like, put on different hats to play with these things. But ultimately, kink is such a cool tool because you can play with the things that are showing up in your life. When you hear people on TED Talks talking about like vulnerability, I love Brene Brown, but like vulnerability is so important, and surrender is important, and these like, concepts. But it's like, how do you practice that? Sometimes it's really hard to understand like how do I actually strengthen that muscle? And kink can be a way of being like, I'm actually going to go into this with the intention of, testing my own resiliency by receiving intense sensation. I'm going to maybe go into this like in a sense that I want to surrender and let go of everything that I know and see like what comes through if I just like let go of my image, and there's these different ways that you could play with it in kink that I think can be so much fun. And yeah, and there's no hangovers afterward. There's no like
Absolutely.
medicine hangovers. And you actually learn communication skills and how to trust yourself and trust other people. I think like the orgasms and the expansion is actually the icing on the cake, but the cake really is about strengthening your own self identity and really stepping back into wholeness and knowing who you are and being able to trust the world and know how to flow with it ultimately.
So, despite my passion for holistic health and natural healing, I am actually not a big supplement girly. With rare exceptions, supplements seem to generate their own, albeit mild, side effects for me, and I don't take anything regularly and haven't for many years. I do, however, know the importance of remineralization when it comes to optimizing the body's water. And for years now, I've taken Kinton, which is plasma seawater, and it has over 78 bioavailable minerals. No additives, no sweeteners, no nothing. It's exclusively distributed in North America by Quicksilver Scientific. And you can visit my page to learn more at quicksilverscientific.com/Kelly B and use the code Kelly B at checkout to save 15% off your first purchase. This has been, yeah, my exact observation is that, a lot of us who have checkered histories when it comes to our bodies, whether that's because of sexual abuse or, you know, even consensual experiences that are then narrated later as having been violation. We have self-betrayed and been betrayed as women, and to engage in the setting of conditions for safe pleasure is such a therapy. It's such a therapy. It's such a rewiring. And you talk about, in fact, I just wrote this quote from you into my new book, The Reclaimed Woman, because I loved it so much. You talk about how boundaries, right? So this like buzzword of boundaries, they don't need to be for self-protection. And in fact, when they are, sometimes, it reads as fear and it doesn't read as self-regard. And sometimes it can probably perpetuate, that separation that drives the need for boundaries and the experience that others aren't taking you and your welfare, into consideration. But you talk about boundaries as being, necessary for more pleasure to be experienced. And I'd love for you to speak to that, because, when you said that when I was with you in Austin, I was like, that reframe is exactly what I'm interested in living into, because this righteous sort of like, cold no that a lot of women are encouraged to uphold. And I'm all about the no, but the experience of no that is in service of a yes, I hadn't heard it expressed quite the way that you did. So I'd love for you to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, boundaries are for our pleasure ultimately. And it's absolutely true. Like most of the time, I've done so many consent workshops and I've been trained in the wheel of consent. And there's such an emphasis around having your boundaries and having your no, which I think is really powerful and really necessary. And I also think it's as basic and foundational and as first step beginners as it gets, like really, and so the idea of like, evolving from that place of understanding what your no's are and like being secure enough to really have your no is so important. But where do we go from here? Because people will spend years and years and years tending to a foundation without ever building anything on top of the foundation. So if we have this foundational piece, the idea is like remembering that ultimately, if we're going to be moving through life following our pleasure, then when I'm a no to something, I'm a yes to something else. And if I'm a no to an interaction with somebody, it's because I want more pleasure in my life. And having that reframe and moving with that sort of energy kind of opens you up to like more possibility and invitations. And ultimately, I think it actually kind of puts you in positions that you are meant to be in. And you don't actually have to use your no that much anymore because you're just automatically going to be in situations and environments that are going to be in alignment with your yeses. So that's the idea of like doing the reframe and bringing in the energy of pleasure through our boundaries. So you can actually say like, I want to open to more pleasure and I know what I align with and what I don't align with. And that will ultimately, start bringing you into areas of your life where you're not even using your boundaries as much anymore because everything around you is going to be more aligned with your truth and the ways that bring you most pleasure.
Exactly. My coach, Whitney Lowry, who introduced me to your work,
Oh, yeah.
she calls it, focusing on creating versus fixing, right? Because if you orient towards boundaries that way, right, you're not spending a lot of energy on validating your no and making sure everybody understands your no and then upholding your no. You've already trained your focus on what it is that you want to create more of, what it is that you want to experience more of, what it is that now gets to be on stage because you've declined, another opportunity or another interaction. So it really is a mindset shift, perhaps even out of the victim consciousness that can be, subtly reinforced by this. It's almost like an entitlement energy that's like,
Mm,
no, and you better respect my no. I
right.
spent a lot of years in that place and it doesn't feel amazing. So I love this reframe. There's something else I want to double click on before we talk more about the retreat, because you mentioned if the scene that we had done went wrong,
Mhm.
you talk about, which I absolutely love also, oopsies and ouchies. And I just think it's such a sweet and humanizing perspective on how to like acknowledge that we're just figuring it out together, right? Like we're just humaning
Mhm.
however makes sense to us in the moment. And this is not, this is not a performance life, that we are delivering. And if you are, let's say in a partnership, exploring some of these practices, how do those concepts come into play and why have you found them useful? Because I bet you would have recruited some of that had things gone a little funky.
Absolutely. I think a lot of feedback I get from students and people interested in exploring this world, especially with kink, one of the first things they say is like, what if I hurt someone? Like, what if I do something and it hurts them or it upsets them or, like, what if that happens? And I'm like, it's probably going to happen. Like, this is us being humans. And when you put yourself out there, it's a possibility that it may not land the way you're hoping it will. But instead of saying, like, I'm not going to even try, or I'm going to just take myself out without even giving it a chance, the idea of like giving yourself language that does lean more towards this innocent idea of like, oopsies and ouchies is very childlike almost. And it releases us from shame, blame, and making wrong because in tantra everything is a yes and things just are essentially. So if we truly believe that people we're interacting with have good hearts and have the best intentions, and aren't predators or psychopaths, then we can lean into this idea that yeah, this is us being humans and we're not going to always do it perfect, but at the end of the day everything is an opportunity. So if I stepped on your toes, like let's say during that experience it did go sideways and you started to yell at me or called a timeout, it would be an opportunity for me to like reconnect with you, lean in, not beat myself up like, oh, I'm an idiot, or what's her problem? She doesn't get it. Like there's so many ways my ego could deal with that. But instead, if I let my ego just, sit to the side for a moment, I want to lean into the creativity and curiosity and know, like, what's going on for you? Like, can you let me know? Because oopsie is about my impact not matching my intention. And an ouchie is something happened and it didn't feel good. And I wanted to know like what didn't feel good about that so I can be with you and we can get to repair so we can be in right relationship again. Because ultimately it's all, Stan Tatkins talks about relationships being 1/3 attunement, 1/3 repair, and 1/3 rupture. It's never 100% attunement. It's never going to be 100% repair. So if I know that, part of a healthy dynamic is that ruptures are going to happen, but it could actually be in a doorway for more depth and intimacy. Like you might even share, like when you said that, really reminded me of my mom. And that was really painful memory for me. And I might say, like, tell me more about that, and give you an opportunity to share like what that was like for you. And I would feel so much closer to you hearing that story about maybe something that happened with your mother that was reminded as I was interacting with you, and that opportunity would have never presented itself if I hadn't done the oopsie or made the mistake. So I want to just believe everything's an opportunity. Listen, I'm glad everything worked out and that wasn't the case, but I also really trust you and I really trust myself that it would have brought us to the places that we needed to go together. And it would have brought us into deeper connection and depth within ourselves and each other ultimately. Because I was all in. My intentions were pure. I was very clear on why I was doing what I was doing. And if anything, I always just want to keep going back to the intention, especially if the ego starts to, poke its head up. I want to just go right back to the intention again, which was for helping people learn and to help people love themselves more. Ultimately was my intention at your workshop, was to help people love themselves more and get excited about possibility.
The description that you offer of like what these these simple words can create space for is, to my mind, that's intimacy, right? Like that is the nature of intimacy, is the willingness to lean in with curiosity to discover why somebody might be having a different experience, than you want them to be having, or than you intended, or both, for them to have. And you mentioned a word, attunement. And, it's a perfect segue to the experience that I had at your retreat, where I was able to, it was almost like I walked into the room of the same energy that, literally and figuratively, of the same energy that you brought to the stage, for an entire 4 days. And the space that you hold, I mean, I can't even remember if I've ever, like, I don't know if I've ever been in an experiential space that felt so comfortable while being like such an edge pushing exploration of uncomfortable things.
Mhm.
And that's you. Like that is how you command the room. You create a judgment free, like really judgment free, not like, PC inclusive and judgment free, like a true permission field. And you are so attuned.
Mm.
You said something that I thought was really resonant, because, my domain is really, like hetero man woman relationships. And these are most of the women I speak to. It's my experience. So I speak from, that experience. And you said something, it was kind of like an offhanded comment, but I was like, wow, that is an excellent summary, where you said, typically the attunement of a woman
Mhm.
is to a man and not to herself, right? So we're talking sexually. And then you said the attunement of a man is to his own desires typically, and not to her.
Right.
And so I remember thinking, like, if she gets that, and I'd love for you to like speak a little bit about that, then that must be, the level at which she has observed and is observing like attentional direction. And that's a lot of what you could say kink is about, right? Is attentional vectors. But you have this capacity, perhaps cultivated, as a dom, to feel into the needs. Feel when we needed to take a big breath. Feel when we needed a break. You kept impeccable time, and you shared these practices and resources, right? So we spent time learning. And I was like, I already know the blueprints. I've already interviewed Jaya. Like I've been coached by one of her coaches for years. And I got so much out of that. And, my friend that I went with had like a life-changing experience just hearing about the blueprint that she is, and feeling so validated by that. I mean, it was just watching her. I felt like, wow, this this was worth, the ticket, just to sit here with my friend having an experience of like just shedding decades of shame,
Mhm.
around what it is that she's told herself about her sexuality. And then we spent a lot of time on very intentional containers for impact play. And I would say like even like novice to moderate skills, right? It was like beyond just sort of like the basics. And I had the pleasure of working with one of your professional doms. So Kelly always
I'm
takes
so
care of
glad you
herself.
got to receive. I wanted you to receive more and more because you're such a leader in these spaces, and it was
That
exciting.
was by absolute design and caretaking of myself. It was fantastic. And then I had an experience later with, I think probably one of like the world's professional floggers. And it was just amazing. And I joked with my friend at some point. I was like, everybody here is so wholesome.
I know.
Right? It's like the people that she attracts, you just want to like, I just want to like pinch everyone's cheeks. Like they're so kind and like wholesome. I don't know how else to put it. And it
Yeah.
was very endearing because that influences a lot of how these practices are framed, is like, who are you actually playing with? And especially when everybody's kind of a beginner, it can be dicey. It can be very dicey. So I would love for you to speak to this concept of attunement, how it is that you have come to appreciate its importance, and how it is relevant to what you're teaching in these containers. Because I felt, like I really leveled up in that very specific domain, even just over those days. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad. I think it's interesting because as women, and this is generally speaking, of course, but as women we really had to learn attunement. Quite often it's part of our survival, of being able to be aware of what's in our environment, be aware of who is around us, and making sure that we remain safe. Men, generally again speaking, haven't had that necessity as much as most women have. So the idea of attunement really was brought to the forefront to me probably like 10 years ago, repeatedly being in these erotic spaces that usually were led by men, by male leaders. And I truly believe there was a lot of well intentions and a lot of good hearts, but there was also a lot of consent violations and a lot of misattunement. And I noticed, I'm like, wow, it really boils down. If you want to have a successful sex life or an erotic experience or a relationship, like attunement is so important, because most of the times men and women communicate very differently. Women have a lot of indirect communication versus men who are very, very direct. So if you are working with communication and that's it, that's really only half the battle. Being able to attune and notice like, oh, I'm in communication with my partner, but I'm noticing that in my body, even though my partner said yes to something, it doesn't feel like a yes. Let me investigate that. Let me just make sure. And I noticed these men in these leadership positions were lacking accountability in a way, because they would be like, well, she said yes, without really taking into consideration their position of authority and power within that dynamic. And being really clear that, like, even though somebody's saying yes with their mouth in that moment, everything in their body or their energy field might be saying the complete opposite. And if you don't pick up on that, that is the fault of the leader. Like, ultimately, I'm a very big advocate of letting people know, especially when it comes to sex and eroticism, it is chaos. It is messy. It is not black and white. It is not super clear. So we go back again to the language of oopsie and ouchie and take acknowledgement and accountability for the roles and the ways we contribute to everything that happens in our lives. And we come back to being in right relationship again that way, because the attunement piece is about holding the me and the we simultaneously. It's about being really connected to self and connected to the things around us, so that we can use discernment on how to navigate the world that we're in. It's really about showing up with what's real and what's in reality, not the story that's going on in our head or the agenda we might be on or whatever that happens to us, ultimately. But it's really about being here in the now, present in our bodies, and being able to hold the me and we simultaneously.
I love that. And
Mhm.
and it's interesting when you bring up how women are adapted to external focus in this way. and how often, because so much of it is from a place of like vigilance, right? And securing basic safety, so much of it can be projection, right? So a lot of, I know you know this language too, but what I teach is around neuroception, right? So you can see the pile of laundry on the chair and you can think it's an intruder in your room. It's just a fucking pile of laundry. And
Right.
until you begin to, somatically integrate, you can misperceive what is outside of you, right? So it's like attunement, even if you're so used to trying to read like what your partner is up to, until you have cultivated basic safety in your system through safe containers, through boundaries, through this practice of coming back to your own body first, you can misread and project. And also, yeah, like, and then continue to abandon yourself in service of this goal. And both people are just sort of like, who, it's like Betty Martin says, like, who is even having fun here? Right? Like, who is this
Right.
for? Like, who's experiencing the pleasure? We think the other one is because of what we're doing. And it reminds
Mhm.
me, it's funny, even as a mother, I mean, who would ever think, right? These skills would translate from kink spaces to mothering. And I see it as all connected. I mean, the other day, so I'm taking one of my daughters and her boyfriend to a concert, right, for her birthday. And my other daughter was like, "No, I don't want to go. I'm going to stay home." And then we were all talking about the concert together, and I just felt something in my system that felt a little funky, like tight. I don't know how else to explain it. And I looked over at my daughter who was not coming to the concert, and I just could perceive she wants to go now. But she's like too proud to say. I mean, it's such a mundane example. And then I went to her later. I said, "Do you think you want to come with us after all?" And she's like, "Yeah, is it okay?"
Aw.
Right? So it's like these simple moments as a mother, which in so many ways is being a dom, right? These simple moments where you attune to your own system, and therefore you develop the skills to read another's system and help them express their needs and then perhaps meet them. So I'm just not sure what kinds of skills are more valuable in the world. And of course, if you can cultivate them through pleasure and play, like what better path is there?
Oh, I love that you had that experience. That's so beautiful. And what it reminds me of is also such a foundational piece is having that regulated nervous system, because people are always talking about wanting to feel safe and be safe. And I get a question a little bit around, well, what's happening in your nervous system and how do you get yourself safe, and that permission field that we create during the 4-day weekend is important, but it's also like an empowerment to say like, hey, like, how do you regulate your nervous system, get attuned and present with what is? And then how do you make adjustments as necessary to really allow yourself to be here as fully as you really want to be here? Because ultimately, you're the one in charge here. You're the dom of your life. And we're here to support and celebrate however that looks. But like it really does start with you stepping into your own power and knowing how to navigate that. So with men and women, even who are exploring erotically, women being outwardly focused, it's, living sort of a half life, honestly, because being able to be tuned into yourself and like, what are my desires? What do I want? And how do I keep myself regulated so I can, move with fulfillment and ease and grace is so important as well.
Yeah, it's how we live in a safer world. I mean, that's what I've come to. It's not by, demanding that the world be safer. It's not, hoping, praying, wishing that one day all the bad monsters will die or be put in jail. It's literally these simple steps of learning how to trust your own discernment because you're in your own body, feeling what your yes is, what your no is, and you have practiced giving voice to that, aligning with that. And it's so much easier to practice that when a container has been specifically created with
Mm.
that intention. So I am, yeah, big endorsement to something more. And the range of people who would benefit is huge. That's why it was like such an eclectic crew with all of this like pure-hearted intentionality around personal expansion and moving through discomfort and alchemizing pain points that are chronic, right? And you just create such amazing conditions for that. So I really, really, really suggest that, people consider that opportunity.
Thank you so much. It is definitely the culmination of 23 years of doing this work all around the world with thousands of clients and wanting to bring an experience to people so that they can have a sense of what they really desire in this world and get them connected to themselves and to what's possible. So I was so glad to see you as part of that experience. And yes, more please. I would love to see you.
More, please. Yes.
Wow.
That's so good. Yeah. I mean, your devotion to this path is so felt and witnessed. I mean, the energy that you put into that, I just asked you earlier when the next one is, and it's in June. And I was like, wow.
Yes.
It's like, so there's so much heart and energy that you and your team put into that experience. And it's such an opportunity. So I am so blessed to know you, to walk this path with you, to have you as a guide and dom and teacher. And I love sharing you with the world. So I'll make sure that everybody has the links in show notes that they need.
Thank you.
And yeah. Big
Yay.
hug to you, woman.
You. I love you. I love what you represent. And thank you for being such a positive impact in this world. And next time I see you, you owe me a spanking, my friend.
I gotta skill up.
Let's go.
It's intimidating.
I want to make sure you were paying attention in class.
So good.